On a sunny Sunday afternoon in August 1988, approximately 300,000 spectators gathered at Ramstein Air Base in West Germany to watch Flugtag 88, one of Europe's largest and most spectacular air shows. Families spread picnics on the grass, children pointed excitedly at the aircraft overhead, veterans and aviation enthusiasts sat in the best seats in the house, closest to the flight line where they could see every single detail of the acrobatic performances. At 3:45 p.m., as Italy's elite Frecce Tricolori display team executed their signature pierced heart maneuver, three jets collided in mid-air. One burning aircraft cartwheeled into the densely packed crowd, unleashing an inferno of jet fuel, burning metal, and shrapnel. In 7 seconds, 70 people died and more than 1,000 were injured in what became the deadliest airshow disaster in history until 2002. Ramstein Air Base served as one of the most strategically important United States Air Force installations in Europe during the Cold War. Opened in 1951, Ramstein functioned as the headquarters for the United States Air Force in Europe and as a critical logistics hub for NATO operations. Flugtag 88, literally Flight Day 88, was an annual tradition at Ramstein, one of several open house events the US military held across West Germany to foster goodwill with the local German communities and showcase NATO air power. These air shows served as both diplomatic and morale purposes, allowing civilians to see their tax dollars at work while strengthening the bonds between the American forces and their German hosts. The 1988 air show promised to be spectacular. The lineup included acrobatic teams from multiple NATO countries, static displays of military hardware, and demonstrations by some of the most advanced aircraft in the Western arsenal. Among the featured performers were Italy's Frecce Tricolori, the largest acrobatic display team and one of the most renowned in aviation. The squadron was created to represent Italy internationally through precision flying displays, selecting top pilots from various squadrons to form a permanent national unit. The Frecce Tricolori typically operated with 10 aircraft, 9 in tight formation and 1 as a soloist, allowing for complex synchronized maneuvers that showcase pilot skill and aircraft agility. Pilots selected for Frecce Tricolori were seasoned Italian Air Force officers with thousands of flight hours and extensive experiences. The team leader, called Pony 1, and the soloist, called Pony 10, were typically lieutenant colonels, senior officers with the judgment and skill required for the team's most demanding positions. By 1988, the Frecce Tricolori had performed hundreds of shows across Europe and beyond, establishing a reputation for precision, professionalism, and spectacular aerial artistry. Their displays featured intricate formations that painted the Italian flag's green, white, and red colors across the sky using smoke trails. Among their most celebrated and technically demanding maneuvers was the pierced heart. The pierced heart represented the climax of many Frecce Tricolori performances where two groups of aircraft traced out a heart shape in front of the audience along the runway. The maneuver worked as follows. The first formation, consisting of 5 aircrafts, flew in an upward and looping path, creating the upper curves of a heart shape. Simultaneously, a second formation of 4 aircraft, Ponies 6 to 9, mirrored this movement on the opposite side. As these two groups diverged at the top of their loops and descended back towards the runway, they passed each other at extremely close proximity, completing the parallel sides of the heart. At precisely the right moment, the soloist aircraft, or Pony 10, would enter the opposite direction at a high speed and low altitude, flying directly to the center point where the two formations converge at the base of the heart. This created the visual effect of an arrow piercing the heart, hence the maneuver's name. The timing had to be perfect. The soloist needed to arrive at the intersection point at exactly the same moment as the two formations, threading the narrow gap between them at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. A margin of error measured in fraction of a second separated a flawlessly executed maneuver from disaster. However, on August 28, 1988, everything went wrong. The weather at Ramstein that Sunday was perfect for flying. Clear skies, good visibility, and light winds. By early afternoon, the air show was in full swing. Approximately 300,000 spectators filled every available viewing area on and around the base. The crowd included American military families, local German civilians, aviation enthusiasts from across Europe, and numerous children. The prime viewing area, considered the best seats in the house, was located directly along the flight line, as close to the runway as civilian spectators could get. Thousands of people packed into this section, sitting on blankets and lawn chairs, eager for the closest possible view of the acrobatic performances. The Frecce Tricolori's performances was scheduled for mid-afternoon. The 10 MB339 jets took off in formation and began the display routine. For several minutes, everything proceeded flawlessly. The teams executed formation loops, rolls, and other maneuvers with the precision that had made them famous. And then came time for the finale, the pierced heart. At 3:45 p.m., leading the main formation of 5 aircrafts, ponies 1 to 5, was 49-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Mario Naldini, an experienced pilot and team leader. Flying as Pony 2 was Captain Giorgio Alessio. The soloist role, arguably the most demanding position, was flown by 42-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Ivo Neutrali, piloting Pony 10. When the maneuver began, the two main formations separated and began their looping trajectories, creating the upper curves of the heart shape. Lieutenant Colonel in Pony 10 approached from the opposite direction, preparing to thread through the gap at the base of the heart. But something went wrong. Neutrali entered the maneuver slightly ahead of schedule at a lower altitude than intended. Whether this is due to misjudgment, spatial disorientation, or some other factor could never be determined. What is certain is that when Pony 10 reached the conversion point, two formations were not yet clear. The collision occurred at the base of the heart, at low altitude and high speed, directly in front of 300,000 horrified spectators. Pony 10 struck the upper surface of Pony 2's fuselage and then collided with the rear section of Pony 1's fuselage. The impacts were catastrophic. Pony 1 immediately began to spin out of control. Pony 2's tail section was destroyed, and Pony 10's forward section was obliterated, and it turned instantly into a fireball. Captain Alessio in Pony 2 attempted to eject, pulling his ejection handle. However, the aircraft was too low and inverted. Alessio was blown clear of the disintegrating jet, but his parachute never had time to deploy. He struck the runway, dying instantly before his chute could open. Lieutenant Colonel Naldini in Pony 1 also attempted to eject, but his aircraft was spinning violently and on fire. What happened next unfolded with horrifying speed. The entire sequence, from the initial collision to the final impact with the crowd, took less than 7 seconds, leaving almost no time for spectators to react or escape. Pony 10, piloted by Neutrali, continued on a ballistic trajectory across the runway. Completely out of control and in flames, its forward section destroyed by the impact. The burning jet hit the ground ahead of the spectator stand, exploding in a massive fireball. A parked police vehicle near the active runway was instantly destroyed. The fireball consumed it. But Pony 10 didn't stop. The wreckage continued forward, cartwheeling and tumbling, picking up the 3 stand container wire fences as it went. The aircraft crossed an emergency access road, its momentum carrying it directly towards the densest concentration of spectators. The burning wreckage slammed into the crowd and struck a parked ice cream van. Hundreds of gallons of highly flammable aviation fuel sprayed across the parked spectator area and ignited. A wall of flame swept through the crowd. Simultaneously, pieces of Pony 1 crashed to the earth. One large section struck a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter that had been positioned near the flight line as part of the emergency medical evacuation capability. The helicopter's pilot, Captain Kim Strader, was in the cockpit when the wreckage hit. The impact and subsequent fire severely burned Slater. He would survive for 20 days before succumbing to his injuries on September 17th at the Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas. Pony 2 disintegrated in the collision, with parts strewn along the runway. After the crash, the remaining 7 Frecce Tricolori aircraft regrouped and landed at nearby Sembach Air Base, their pilots in shock at what had just transpired. The fireball that swept through the spectator area was unlike anything witnesses had ever seen before. One survivor later recalled, "After the impact and the explosions, there was dead silence for a few seconds. Everyone stared at the inferno, no one moved. Only then panic broke out. People screamed and ran away in all directions." Those on the periphery of the flames suffered horrific burns. Skin blistered and peeled away. Clothing melted into their flesh. The concertina wire that Pony 10 had picked up during his death plunge scattered across the crowd, slashing through the panicked mass of humanity with razor-sharp barbs. Debris from the aircraft flew through the crowd like shrapnel. Some victims were struck by airplane parts, others were hit by items knocked loose on the ground by the impact. Of the 31 people who died on impact, 28 had been hit by debris in the form of airplane parts, concertina wire, and items on the ground. The remaining 3 were the Italian pilots. 16 additional fatalities occurred in the days and weeks after the disaster as victims succumbed to their severe burns. The scale of the disaster immediately overwhelmed emergency services. They were plagued by serious coordination failures that, while not causing the disaster, certainly worsened its aftermath and may have cost additional lives. The disaster revealed serious shortcomings in the handling of large-scale medical emergencies by German civil and American military authorities. The US military personnel did not immediately allow German ambulances onto the base, creating critical delays. Jurisdictional confusion meant that German civilian emergency services, which had more experience with mass casualty incidents, were initially prevented from accessing victims who desperately needed their help. American helicopters and ambulances provided the quickest and largest means of evacuation, but they lacked sufficient capacities for treating them or had difficulties finding them in the chaos. The dedicated medical evacuation Black Hawk helicopter, destroyed in the initial crash, was supposed to be the primary means of evacuating critically injured patients. Its loss in the first few seconds of the disaster significantly hampered evacuation efforts. Despite these serious failures, many individuals displayed extraordinary heroism. The final death toll stood at 70 people. 67 were spectators and 3 were the Italian pilots. Among the dead were 4 Americans, 1 person each from France and the Netherlands, and 61 Germans. 346 spectators sustained serious injuries in the resulting explosion and fire. Hundreds more had minor injuries, cuts, bruises, smoke inhalation, and psychological trauma. The injured were distributed among 30 medical facilities across the region. At the time, the Ramstein disaster was the deadliest airshow disaster in history. It would hold this grim distinction until August 27, 2002, when a similar disaster happened at the Kinliv Air Show in Ukraine, which killed 77 people. Subsequently, an investigation was launched and it revealed that the main cause was a misjudgment in timing and positioning by the solo pilot. Neutrali entered the maneuver at the wrong altitude and with a slight delay, leading to the collision with the main formation. The Ramstein disaster fundamentally transformed airshow safety regulations worldwide. The changes implemented in the wake of the tragedy would reshape how acrobatic displays are conducted, potentially preventing similar disasters for decades to come. These changes included increased crowd separation, restrictions on high-risk maneuvers, improved emergency planning, better safety briefings, and pilot training. The Ramstein disaster left an indeniable mark on popular culture, particularly in Germany. Perhaps most famously, the German industrial metal band Ramstein drew its name from the event, evoking the site's name and the horror of the collision. In the years following the disaster, several memorials were erected to honor the victims. A prominent memorial was built near the crash site at Ramstein Air Base, featuring plaques and inscriptions dedicated to those who lost their lives. The local community around Ramstein and the broader aviation enthusiast community mourned their loss and sought ways to memorialize the deceased. Every year, they hold a ceremony on August 28th, which is attended by survivors, relatives of victims, and distinguished visitors. The Ramstein disaster devastated the Frecce Tricolori organization. 3 of their pilots had died. The team's signature maneuver had caused the deadliest airshow disaster in history. The psychological toll on the surviving pilots was immense. The team suspended performances for a period following the disaster. When they resumed the displays, significant changes were implemented. The Pierce Heart maneuver was retired from the repertoire, safety protocols were enhanced, and altitude minimums for complex maneuvers were raised. The risk calculations that had allowed such aggressive displays were fundamentally reconsidered. Despite the tragedy, the Frecce Tricolori continued to operate and remains Italy's national acrobatic team today. The organization had maintained its reputation for precision and professionalism while incorporating the hard lessons learned at Ramstein. Their team continues to perform at air shows worldwide, though always with the shadow of August 28, 1988, present in their institutional memory. The Ramstein Air Show Disaster stands as a watershed moment in aviation safety, particularly for public displays of acrobatic flying. 70 people died and more than 1,000 were injured because a complex maneuver performed hundreds of times before without incident failed in the most catastrophic way possible. A pilot misjudged his timing and position by perhaps a second and a few meters. That tiny error, at the speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour, resulted in a mid-air collision. The 7 seconds between the collision and the final impact left almost no time for escape. Today, air shows continue worldwide, thrilling millions of spectators annually. The displays are safer, the precautions more rigorous, and the risk more carefully calculated. But the shadow of Ramstein remains, a reminder that even the most skilled pilots, flying the most reliable aircraft, can experience catastrophic failures when pushing the boundaries of what is possible in the sky. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to see more videos just like this, be sure to like and subscribe. I also have a playlist on other airplane disasters, which you can check out on my channel or linked down in the description and comment section down below. Also, if you'd like to support the channel and catch these videos early, you can check out my Patreon, which is also linked down below. But with that said, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next video.